once it stops.
Thank you, Roberta. I'm going to read this quote, and I haven't put the author of the quote here. It came from a letter, and I'll just ask for takers after I read the quote if they have any guesses who this is. I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. They have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Any guesses on who wrote this? This was written by John Adams, who we all know was the second president of the United States, but he was also one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence was assigned to a group of 5 people to write by the Continental Congress. We understand that Thomas Jefferson was the principal author, but we do have, and we'll get into this more, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman also playing roles here. I'd like to ask why it is that John Adams said this. We know that the Jews did not make up much of the population of the United States at this time. In fact, there were 2.5 million people living in America in the 1770s. Any guesses for how many Jews there were? It was 2,000, approximately 2,000, which would be less than 1/10 of 1%. I'll just share a quote from Jeff Jacoby, Proclaim Liberty, How the Hebrew Bible Molded America. He said the Hebrew presence in revolutionary America was microscopic, but the Hebrew influence on revolutionary America's ideas and national destiny was immense, pretty much picking up on the Adams quote here. So if it wasn't population, what was it? And the answer, of course, and you see from the title of this little session here, is the Bible. Let's talk about what was then and still is today, by far, the most widely read book in all of human history, and certainly in colonial America, the absolutely dominantly read book, and that is the Holy Bible. And the Hebrew Bible makes up, of course, the first part of the Holy Bible. Our Christian friends call this the Old Testament, and the New Testament we call our Bible the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible not only is the first part of the overall Holy Bible, but it is a very, very significant part. Feel free to yell it out or put it in chat. Any guesses as the percentage of the overall Holy Bible that is covered by the Hebrew Bible, if we counted words? And the answer would be 77%. 77% of the words of the Holy Bible come from the Hebrew Bible. And it's not only that, but let's just talk about the books that we're talking about here. And books that influenced the authors of the Declaration of Independence. We have, of course, the first book of the Hebrew Bible, which is the first book of the Holy Bible, Genesis, the story of creation. Our lives, our liberties come from one source. They come from God. We have the second book of the Bible, Exodus, which I would submit, and I would ask for any challenges to this, is the greatest story ever read, ever written about freedom and liberty. I don't think there's even a close second call to this. This was the second book of the Bible, and this was widely read. The Bible is read at homes. In talking colonial America, it's read in homes, it's read in schools, it's of course read in churches. It is preached all over. The sermons are heard. They're not only heard, they're published. Just as an example of some of what was going on in this connection here, and some of the citations, one of the ministers, well-known ministers at that point in time, Samuel Sherwood, gave a very important sermon in 1776, where he basically said, America, not the Hebrews, America represents God's chosen people, picking up on the concept of chosenness. Ezra Stiles was a very prominent figure in colonial times. He actually befriended the Truro synagogue rabbi. Ezra Stiles became president of Yale. He also helped found Brown University. He gave a 100-page sermon to the Connecticut General Assembly, where he compared America to biblical Israel. We know, going back in time, how important the Exodus story was, for example, to the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims compared themselves to the Exodus story, and there are so many parallels here. Escaping oppression, seeking freedom, crossing a sea, living in wilderness, having a vision for the promised land. It's parallel after parallel here. So we have all of this going on, and to respond to really the last part of what John Adams said here, he could have stopped the sentence where he said, they have given religion to 3/4 of the globe. He stopped it there. At that point in time, that was true. But he then goes on to say, and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. And that is because people read the Hebrew Bible, the Genesis story, the Exodus story, and then what comes after that, which are 613 commandments. It's the law that comes after that. It's the rule of law that then is adopted by our founding fathers, overcoming the rule of force and overcoming King George. So before we get into the founding fathers themselves, let's talk about a couple of other antecedents here. We certainly know that the founding fathers were influenced by the Enlightenment. No doubt about that. And the Enlightenment was a very important part of overall progress of humankind. But those who were involved in the Enlightenment were also readers of the Bible, also believers in God. And the one that I'll speak of in particular, and most relevant to our founding fathers, was John Locke. So Roberta, do you have the next one?
This is the next slide.
John Locke was an English philosopher. You see there the dates of his life. He's the author of 2 treatises of government, born into a Puritan family. He was greatly influenced by Genesis chapters 1 and 2. He firmly believed that one's life and liberty are the creation of God. He believed that the moral laws of the 10 Commandments were objective, universal, and eternal, manifesting the will of God, and that the 10 Commandments were as axiomatic as basic mathematical principles. In other words, if Locke were to be sitting here, he would say, just as 2 and 2 equals 4, just as 5 and 5 equals 10, we accept those, so too is it axiomatic that we should accept each of the 10 commandments. So Locke is a member of is regarded as one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, and he is also someone who is greatly influenced by the Hebrew Bible here. Locke believed that all humans were created equally, and what followed from there was the belief that government could only exist with the consent of the governed. One other note here is we talk about the Hebrew Bible as part of the Holy Bible, is there is no creation story in the New Testament. There is no story of freedom in the New Testament. There are not 613 commandments in the New Testament setting forth the law. And again, these are such important principles that affected these people. Now, another antecedent for our founding fathers was Thomas Paine. And if we could have the next slide, Roberta, please. Thomas Paine was born in England. He emigrated to America in 1774. And in short order time, he wrote and published Common Sense in January 1776. This was 6 months before the Declaration. When we think of bestsellers these days, if you look at the New York Times bestsellers list, typical bestseller, if you got to 100,000 copies lifetime, that would be great. So of about 340 million percentage of the population that's buying that book. By comparison, Common Sense sold 500,000 copies to a population of 2.5 million. 20% of colonial America purchased that copy, and no doubt one neighbor gave it to the next one so they wouldn't have to buy their own. It was just widely read throughout colonial America. Thomas Paine was very much influenced by the Hebrew Bible. In section 2 of Common Sense, entitled Of Monarchy and Hereditary Succession, he made two specific references to the Hebrew Bible. Judges chapter 8 tells the story of Gideon having saved the Hebrews from the Midians. The Midians had come to Gideon and they said, "We want you to be our king." Gideon refused. He refused to become king. And this was the first of the two biblical references that Thomas Paine cited in support of his argument that monarchy is not to be followed. He also, in the second reference, referred to 1 Samuel 8, where Samuel relays God's objections to the people's demand for a king. One other note about Thomas Paine is, we don't know this for sure, but we believe that he influenced the drafting of the Declaration, and that there is, in fact, an early draft of the Declaration where on the reverse side it has the inscription TP, presumably for Thomas Paine. So let's now turn to the authors of the Declaration. And if we could go to the next slide, Roberta, we begin with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was born in Virginia in 1743. He is the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. He attended Episcopal Church as a youth, but he became a deist during his college years, believing that there is one God, that God is sovereignly good. He rejected the divinity of Jesus, and he rejected the precepts, many of the precepts of the church. He studied Locke while he was at the College of William and Mary. Thomas Jefferson was a student of the Hebrew Bible. He believed that the Sabbath was a divine institution and was a great blessing to the world. He believed that God created humans as moral equals and gave them rights. And at the very same time that the Declaration was being drafted, there was an additional charge being given that Jefferson and Ben Franklin were part of, and that was to come up with the Great Seal of the United States. There needed to be a seal because the United States was going to be entering into treaties with France and the like here, and you cannot sign a treaty without having a seal. For the Great Seal of the United States, Jefferson proposed a depiction of the children of Israel in the wilderness, led by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And we all know where that comes from. So here is Thomas Jefferson rejecting many of the doctrines of the church, rejecting the divinity of Jesus, being a student of our Hebrew Bible, and here he is, the principal author of the Declaration. We're going to be getting to text of the Declaration in a little bit. Let's talk next about a second member of the Committee of Five, and if we go to the next slide, Roberta. And this is Ben Franklin.
Larry, is it okay
Yes.
if I give everybody a link to your materials?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Okay, great. Keep going.
Ben Franklin was born in Massachusetts in 1706, but we know that he lived most of his life in Philadelphia. A member of the Committee of the Five, as I said. He was born into a Puritan family, but he came to dislike organized religion, rarely attended services, and he, like Jefferson, considered himself a deist, a believer in God as creator, and otherwise rejecting much of Christian doctrine. I just mentioned the Great Seal. He had a different proposal, but also from our Hebrew Bible. In Franklin's proposal for the Great Seal, he has the scene from Exodus where Moses is standing on the shore, extending his hand over the sea, and depicting rays of the pillar of fire. The motto he proposed was rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And turning to the next slide, if we might, Roberta, we then have John Adams. And we opened with his quote, which said how significant the Hebrews were to overall civilization, that even if he were an atheist, he would think that the Hebrews had more influence than any other culture. He was born in Massachusetts in 1735, member of the Committee of Five, raised in a congregational church, but he became a Unitarian. He denied the Trinity. He denied the divinity of Jesus, and he was generally recognized ultimately as a deist. So let's now turn to the text itself of the Declaration. And if we could go to the next slide. I begin with the sentence here, the greatest sentence ever written. You may or may not know, but I commend it to you. The journalist Walter Isaacson has just come out with a book entitled The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. And it is this sentence from our Declaration that we all know. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think that Isaacson may well be right, that this may be the greatest sentence written in the history of humankind. And again, I would challenge anybody to come up with a close second place We have some beautifully written sentences. Charles Dickens, it was the best of times and worst of times, a beautiful sentence, but I don't know that it had the impact that this one sentence had. So let's take a look at this. We hold these truths to be, first of all, one note here is that it is originally written by Jefferson. He had it as we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable rather than self-evident. Franklin edited this to say self-evident because he wanted the Declaration's truths to be plainly stated and not preached. He wanted it to not look as much as a religious document. At the same time, we have in the second line here that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So let's now move on to the next slide here. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And I'm citing to a couple sources here. And I note that for these and the other sources from Torah that I'm citing, I am using the King James translation here. And that is because it was the King James Bible that was written then. We didn't have Sepharia, we didn't have Chabad. So this is what they were reading, and this is what I'm quoting here. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Leviticus 19:15, you shall do no righteousness and justice. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. It was these very verses that Jefferson, that Franklin, that Adams, and that the others were relying on here. The statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, this doesn't come from the New Testament. This comes from Genesis 1. This comes from the other sources here. Let's go to the next slide, Roberta. That they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Citations for this, Genesis 2:7, again, King James translation. And the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Deuteronomy 30:19, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. We could recite to many more verses from our Torah to support the notion here that our life, our liberty, our pursuit of happiness are all coming from the Creator, and the Creator is the God is presented in the Hebrew Bible. What then follows in the Declaration is a very long litany of transgressions by King George, all dealing with violations of the law. We know, just dating back, that the Magna Carta, written in 1215, was probably the second most important document in the evolution of democracy and the rule of law. I gave a talk a couple of years ago talking about how the writers of the Magna Carta were also students of the Bible, how it affected them. But the importance of the Magna Carta is the rule of law. It is the law that is going to be supreme over the ruler and not the other way around. And yet, it wasn't long after the Magna Carta that we have king after king, and then ultimately George III here basically saying, no, I am going to be above the law. And what follows next in the Declaration, and I don't need to have a slide here because it's about 20 different sentences. The king violated this law. The king disregarded that law. There are laws that we have adopted in the colonies that the king is paying no attention to. And it is all about the law. So if we can turn to the next slide, Roberta. So this next sentence comes before the litany of the ways the king violated the law. Jefferson and the Committee of Five write that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles. And we can cite to many verses in the Bible about the rule of law, but I think perhaps the most important one is found here in Parshat Shoftim, Deuteronomy 17, verses 18 to 20. So here we have a statement written millennia before the Magna Carta, and it is making clear here that the ruler is subject to the law and not the other way around. And it shall be when he, the king, sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests and the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. There could not be a stronger statement in our Torah that the king is not only subject to the rule of law, but the king is to have the law, meaning our Torah, with him day and night. He is to read it, and it is those commandments that he is to follow. He is not to be above this. And it was based upon this reaffirmation of the rule of law that is found in the Hebrew Bible, that is not found in the New Testament. This was such an important source for our founding fathers to say, we need to then proceed to put in all of this litany of how George III was violating the law, and this is why we need to have an independent United States. Why don't we take down the screen, Roberta, and let's just open it up here. I would love to open it up and really welcome people's reactions. Any questions also, but how we feel about this. How do we feel that our Hebrew tradition, the Hebrew Bible, the Torah in particular, was so important to our founding fathers? And going back to Adam's first quote, that this was so instrumental in the development of civilized society. I have my thoughts on it, but any thoughts that people like to share? All right, well, let me start and let's see where the discussion goes here. I guess I begin feeling a sense of pride. And I say that as pride in the good way and not the bad way. We know that invoking Christian principles, pride we know is one of the 7 deadly sins, but we know we are proud of our children. We take pride in our Jewish tradition and our customs. And I, for one, take pride that our Torah, our Hebrew Bible, was so influential in the writing of the Declaration, and therefore in the overall history of the world here. I see, and this may get to the next point here. I see in the chat. Let me open the chat so I'm not missing things. Yeah. Catriel is writing, especially when everyone seems to hate us in 2026. Unfortunately, we do have all too much of this. And let me say this, there unfortunately may well be more hate, and that's maybe another discussion for another time, but it's very unfortunate. But just getting back to my feelings about it, in taking pride, I think I also feel like we have a responsibility here, and this may get to the point of where we are in 2026 here. When all is said and done, we know that when we have rulers who are disregarding the law, there are consequences. Maybe not always the consequences we want, but let me say this: the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are going to be around a lot more than the present administration here. I'm not going to get overly political, and I don't know that I want to have this be a political discussion here, but this really gets to the supremacy of the rule of law. It's the law that prevails longer term. We can talk about various points in our history. We had the crisis of the Civil War. We had some terrible, terrible things going on during Reconstruction in the decades after the Civil War. We had constitutional crises with Watergate at other times in our history. Those come and go. Those are difficult. And what survives are the Declaration and the Constitution. So it's not only a sense of pride I have, but I think it's also a sense of responsibility that I think we as Jews have to make sure that what is there, the Declaration, the Constitution, based upon the rule of law, based upon our Torah, will prevail longer term. And I think that means that we need to be active, we need to be involved, we need to remind people of the rule of law. So I take pride, but I think it's also a responsibility. Any thoughts on that? Yeah. Shmuel, go ahead.
Yes, I like everything that you say. It's really fundamental. And I think everybody who reads the Bible feels in his stomach that these rules are fundamental. They are the pillars of our humanity. And they are needed because humanity lacks this let's say, fear from something. That we're human, we are chaotic. And Moses, when he came down from the Mount Sinai, he saw it immediately. He brought the old fundament commandment, and what he saw with the gold calf and dancing in the
Right.
festival that they did. Already the Israelis shows that humanity needs it, that it is missing. And I think also in the erection of the United States, all the states were a little bit different. One pushed to this side, one pushed to this side, and to get a common sense of this all new nation, this really fundamental commandment were a great help, because the Creator stand about them. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as you were speaking, I would make these points here. We've been concentrating on certain parts of the Torah, which the Genesis creation story, the Exodus story of freedom, and the laws. But just to go into a little more detail on the laws, because it's not just their influence on the Declaration, but really all of the law of Western civilization comes from our Torah. In law school, you study contract law, you study property, you study torts, personal injury, you study criminal law. It's all there in Torah. That's where it begins. And it is based upon our Torah that legal codes evolved over the years, and it's all there. I think I saw, Katrina, you were saying here, not to be defeatist. It's our responsibility. You know, we have our own tiny voices here, and yet we also have the right to protest. We have the right to vote. We have the right to petition. And I'm reminded of the song, one hand can't build a world of peace, two hands can't build a world of peace, but if 2 and 2 and 50, you know the song from growing up in camp and whatever. And I'm a believer in that. The alternative to the rule of law is the rule of force. And the rule of force has prevailed for far too long over the world. The rule of force means whoever is the most powerful rules, and it necessarily means that there cannot be freedom. People are there as a result of them being the strongest. And unfortunately, we have too many parts of the world today that are still controlled by the rule of force. And example one is Russia. Russia is not governed by the rule of law. It's governed by a few thugs who are in there by force. You take away the guns, and Putin is no longer head of Russia, and the people, the people will take things under control there, and hopefully that will come in time. And I have no doubt when that does come in time, that they will be using our declaration, our Constitution, as they go ahead and model what they want to do going forward, because we have had country after country that has used our declaration and our Constitution to be their models for freedom and democracy when they move forward. And I think right now in our country, we are threatened by someone who not only considers himself above the law, but I think it's threatening that he really wants to use potentially force, with the latest being this totally illegal thing with the slush fund, the $1.8 billion slush fund that some of us have a concern for, to arm the thugs who have already been convicted, many of whom who pled guilty to charges, and to arm them going forward. And I think it's a great concern. I have every belief that Congress, including Republicans, are going to prevent this. I know, and you've already heard, that there is a lawsuit to hopefully enjoin this from ever happening here. And again, it will be legal means that will redress this, whether it's a statute of Congress, an act of Congress, which of course would be called for under the Constitution, or a lawsuit, which of course is also provided for under our Constitution. It is hopefully the rule of law that will prevail here. Segev, you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, I concur with you on it all, Larry. I think bring it to the text a little bit. We have our people have always been a fairly small and generally insignificant in the grand scheme of things group. We've never been that large. From our starts, the kingdom of Israel and Judea were tiny. Judea itself was a backwater kingdom until Israel got destroyed. And then all of the refugees from Israel came and flooded in. And so it had a little bit of a limelight, but then it got destroyed. Despite this fact, we've always seen how the world is filled with people who are using violence and force to control things. We have two sort of reactions to that. During the Babylonian captivity, we started our scribal traditions of writing down the Torah. And a lot of the stories that we have developed during that period, and under the Persians as well. And it's in exile, I think, that we get these aspirations of one day ruling ourselves and ruling justly, making sure that the poor and the widow are taken care of. And so I think we get this, the basis of law, like really good law, comes from feeling the effects of being under deep oppression, and being under the thumb of evil people. On the other hand, sometimes when it's so clear that that force is domineering and unstoppable, like under the Syrian Greeks, or the Romans, that you get a different sort of response, like apocalypticism, which came around during the Greco-Roman period. And the most popular apocalyptic book that we have is the book of Daniel, which seeks not a human response to this, but a future savior, the hope for a Messiah, the idea that God will come down and finally punish the evildoers who are crushing us. So I think we should always strive for law, as opposed to the impulse to hope that the people who are hurting us will get their comeuppance in the end from some Deus ex machina.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I think most of us as Jews, and I would think most of the people here are Reform Jews, are not expecting some Messiah to come save the world here, but we all do believe that we partner with God to work toward a more perfect world. And we know from our teachings here, Rabbi Tarfon, that it is not up to us to complete the work, and it may be a long time before the work is completed, but nor shall we desist from it. And I think these are lessons that we should live our lives by, and lessons that we should teach our children. But thank you for sharing that, Segev. Other comments, questions? All right. Well,
Bill, Larry,
yes.
it took me a moment to.
Yeah, go ahead, Penelope.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that in the basically 18th century, as part of the Enlightenment, and we also have to look at the effects of movable type, and the creation of books. prior, starting with the Gutenberg Bible. But I find it fascinating that so many of the early leaders and the colonists in general were so familiar with the Hebrew Bible. And
Yes.
and also I have in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't often the Americas being in the Americas, wasn't it called New Jerusalem? Didn't that phrase wasn't that used to describe what?
I think there were some people who did use that phrase.
Yeah,
But yes, the Bible, as I said earlier, was read at homes. It was read in
right,
schools. It was read in churches. We had preachers all over the place.
right,
Then the preachers would give their sermons. The 100-page sermon that I referenced earlier from Ezra Stiles was widely circulated throughout the United States. He was just a very prominent figure, and here he is in his sermon comparing America to biblical Israel.
right. And I want to take it forward to the Lincoln debates where people would leave their fields, leave their businesses, and spend a full day listening to the debates. And it's like where somehow, and I'll get to the other end of my thinking, somehow that practice, that habit, that behavior of knowing, reading, debating, listening, has disappeared practically.
Yeah.
And
I think there. Go ahead. Finish your point, then I'll comment. Go ahead.
So my question is, how can we use that history? How can we reintroduce it? And you said what I think I and everybody else was surprised, that the quote unquote Christian Bible is 77% the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
That we could reach out, and I guess, it'd be nice if the other reached out, but it's always the oppressed or the marginalized that has to take the step. Look at the whole civil rights movement. That if we could find a way to have discussions with Christians using your information and more to really start dialogues.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I actually, as you were speaking, two developments I think we've had in civilization that causes us to be much less literate than they were back then. Number one, TVs. Number two, smartphones. I think I think we would be very, very hard pressed if we were to put up our grade schoolers in terms of literacy versus grade schoolers back then. And I know that I've read letters that people wrote back then, and just beautiful, beautiful prose. And we don't see that now. Maybe AI might try, but we know that that's really not the answer either.
Right. And so my question is, all of this is fascinating information and critical information. What do we do with it?
Yeah. I think, I'd like to think here that we should all take out of this the importance of the rule of law, our responsibility. Yeah, I love the idea, Penelope, of increasing dialogue with Christians, but I think increasing dialogue across the board. We need to increase dialogue with Islamic people. We need to increase dialogue more generally here. And I don't know if people were at Rabbi Jacob's initial talk today. We really, and if you weren't at it, try to get the tape. I think his primary point here is we need to learn to speak with one another again, and we need to be tolerant of each other's views, and we really need to engage in the very type of dialogue we're talking about here. All right, it's about 5 of here, so why don't we thank everybody for your time. Again, Hag Sameach, and prime time continues. I would consider 5 a.m. also prime time here, so good to see everybody.
Thanks, Larry.
Take care.